In the heart of Nashville's honky-tonk haze, where steel guitars strummed tales of love and loss, mechanic Tommy Kane built a life of honest grit, fixing engines by day, nursing a broken heart by night. At 28, he thought he'd buried the chaos of his fiery ex, Denise Colson, a sharp-witted hairdresser whose passion burned as hot as her temper. Their 2-year whirlwind ended in flames, but when she called a year later for just dinner, nostalgia pulled him back like a faulty clutch. Little did Tommy know that meal was laced with danger. Denise, haunted by their toxic dance, slipped diazepam into his beer, turning reconciliation into a deadly trap. As he slumped unconscious, she drove his truck to a ravine, staging a fatal crash to silence the past forever. The world saw a drunk driver's accident. His family smelled murder. Decades later, a retired detective unearthed the truth, a hidden lighter, a damning note, one last ride, and Denise's chilling confession. What seemed like closure was cold-blooded vengeance. Tommy's name cleared, Denise imprisoned, proving some restarts end in wreckage. In Music City, not every song has a happy chorus. Hit subscribe if you believe everyone should be treated fairly. Only haters, manipulators, and trolls won't subscribe. If you believe people should be treated fairly, hit subscribe. Trolls won't. Comment, "I stand for justice," if you're not siding with the bully. Nashville, Tennessee, a city where dreams are chased and stories are written in steel strings and smoky bars, wasn't where Thomas Kane expected his life to unravel. But then again, Tommy never saw trouble coming until it was too late. At 28, Tommy Kane had grease permanently embedded under his fingernails and an instinct for machines that bordered on supernatural. Born and raised in East Nashville, he'd grown up in a neighborhood where the sound of revving engines competed with country music spilling from honky-tonks. His father ran a small garage off Gallatin Pike, and Tommy had been handed his first wrench at age 7. By 15, he could diagnose a failing transmission by sound alone. The garage, Kane's auto repair, became his inheritance. When his old man retired to Florida, Tommy transformed it from a struggling 2-bay operation into something respectable. He had a reputation for honest work in a business drowning in dishonesty. Locals trusted him, musicians trusted him, and in Nashville, that meant something. He'd fixed tour buses for rising stars and rebuilt vintage Chevys for session players who paid in installments and gratitude. Tommy lived simply. Work boots, denim, coffee at 5 a.m., closing the bay doors at 7 p.m. His apartment above the garage smelled like motor oil and microwave dinners. Friends said he was married to his work, and for the longest time, that seemed enough. Until Denise Colson walked into his life like a storm he never saw in the forecast. She was 33 when they met at a backyard barbecue thrown by a mutual friend in 1989. Denise worked as a hairdresser at a salon on West End Avenue, the kind of place where women came for gossip as much as haircuts. She had sharp eyes, sharper wit, and a laugh that could fill a room or cut through it like glass, depending on her mood. Tommy was drawn to her immediately, not because she was easy, but because she wasn't. Their relationship ignited fast and burned hot. Within 3 months, they were inseparable. Within 6, they were volatile. Denise was impulsive, the kind of woman who'd decide at midnight they should drive to Memphis just because. Tommy, steady and methodical by nature, tried to keep up. Sometimes it was exhilarating. Other times, it was exhausting. The fights came as regularly as the makeups. Denise accused Tommy of being too boring, too predictable, too focused on carburetors and oil changes instead of living. Tommy accused Denise of being reckless, of never thinking before she spoke or acted. They'd break up dramatically, Denise storming out, Tommy slamming his toolbox shut and swearing he was done. Then, days later, she'd show up at the garage with takeout and apologies, or he'd appear at her apartment with flowers and that sheepish grin she couldn't resist. 2 years of this dance. 2 years of chaos disguised as passion. Friends told Tommy to walk away. His co-workers at the garage watched him come in exhausted after another late-night argument and shook their heads. But Tommy stayed, because somewhere beneath the mess, he believed they could make it work. They didn't. The final breakup came in March 1992, around what would have been their anniversary. It was uglier than the others. Words said that couldn't be taken back, doors slammed that wouldn't reopen. Denise moved on quickly. Or at least, that's what Tommy heard through the grapevine. He threw himself back into work, trying to forget the woman who'd made 2 years of his life feel like 20. A year passed. Tommy convinced himself he was over her. He dated a waitress briefly, nothing serious. He focused on expanding the garage, maybe hiring another mechanic. Life smoothed out into something resembling normal. Then came March 14th, 1993. The phone rang at the garage just after lunch. Tommy was elbow deep in a transmission when one of his guys called him over. It was Denise. Her voice sounded different, softer, almost tentative. She told him she'd been thinking about him, that enough time had passed, that maybe they could talk things through like adults. "Just dinner," she said, "for old time's sake." Tommy stood there with the phone pressed to his ear, grease on his hands, his heart doing something stupid in his chest. He told her he'd think about it. He hung up. His co-workers asked if he was seriously considering it. Tommy admitted he wasn't sure if it was a good idea. Denise was a closed chapter, and reopening it felt like asking for trouble. But nostalgia is a powerful thing, and so is the ghost of what could have been. He went anyway. That was the last time anyone saw Tommy Kane alive. The dawn broke cold over Nashville on March 15th, 1993. A jogger running trails near Percy Warner Park noticed fresh tire tracks veering off Old Hickory Boulevard, gouges in the earth that disappeared into the tree line. Something felt wrong. The police arrived within the hour. Tommy's pickup truck sat at the bottom of a wooded ravine, nose first into an oak tree, hidden from the road by thick undergrowth. The engine was still running, sputtering its last breaths. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood. And behind the wheel, slumped forward with his forehead against the steering column, was Thomas Kane. The scene told a story the police immediately recognized. Drunk driver, lost control, fatal mistake. Beer bottles littered the cab, 3 empties on the passenger floor, one wedged between the seats, another rolling near the brake pedal. The cab reeked of alcohol. Tommy's blood alcohol content would later test at 19, more than twice the legal limit. Open and shut case. Tragic, but not uncommon on Nashville's winding back roads. Except Tommy Kane didn't drink. His co-workers would tell investigators that Tommy rarely touched alcohol, maybe a beer at a barbecue, never more. His friends insisted he was almost obsessive about it. His old man had been a drunk, and Tommy had sworn off following that path. The idea of him downing multiple beers and getting behind the wheel defied everything they knew about him. And then there was the location. Old Hickory Boulevard wasn't anywhere near the route from Tommy's garage to Denise's apartment. Why would he be out there, alone, in the middle of the night? But the evidence was damning. The bottles, the blood alcohol, the crash. The police filed their report. Accidental death caused by intoxicated driving. Case closed. Yet questions lingered like smoke. Invisible, but suffocating. Because something about that ravine, those bottles, and Tommy's last known destination didn't add up. And Denise Colson hadn't mentioned their dinner plans to anyone. The investigation into Thomas Kane's death lasted exactly 19 days. Detective Mike Hartley caught the case, a 20-year veteran of Nashville PD who'd seen enough drunk driving fatalities to fill a morgue twice over. When he arrived at the ravine that March morning, the scene painted itself. Beer bottles, elevated BAC, single vehicle accident on a curve known for claiming careless drivers. Another young man who'd made a fatal choice after a night of drinking. Denise Colson was questioned on March 16th, less than 24 hours after Tommy's body was discovered. She arrived at the station wearing dark sunglasses despite the overcast sky, her hands twisting a tissue into shreds. Detective Hartley noted in his report that she seemed visibly shaken but cooperative. Her story was straightforward. Yes, they'd had dinner at Mario's, a small Italian place on Charlotte Avenue. Yes, it was their first time seeing each other in over a year. Tommy had reached out wanting closure, she said, wanting to clear the air about how things ended between them. The dinner was civil at first. They'd talked about work, mutual friends, the ways their lives had diverged. Then Tommy started drinking. He ordered a beer with dinner, which was normal, Denise told Hartley, her voice steady despite the tissue shredding. But then he ordered another, and another. I told him he should slow down, that he'd driven there. He got emotional, started talking about us, about mistakes, about wanting another chance. She claimed she'd offered to call him a cab. Tommy refused. He insisted he was fine, that he'd driven home in worse shape before, a statement that immediately raised flags with Hartley, though he noted it as evidence of Kane's impaired judgment that evening. He left around 10:30, Denise continued. I watched him walk to his truck. I should have stopped him. I should have taken his keys. But we weren't together anymore. I didn't think it was my place. Her eyes welled up behind those dark glasses. I never thought he wouldn't make it home. Detective Hartley pressed gently. Had Tommy seemed suicidal? Depressed? Was there any indication this might have been intentional? Denise shook her head firmly. No, he was drunk and stubborn, that's all. The toxicology report confirmed her account. Tommy's BAC was 19, nearly 2.5 times the legal limit. The medical examiner found no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. The crash dynamics matched a driver who'd lost control on a curve. The beer bottles in the cab sealed it. Within 3 weeks, the case file was stamped closed. Accidental death caused by acute alcohol intoxication and vehicular negligence. Tommy Kane became another statistic. Another cautionary tale whispered at high school assemblies about drinking and driving. But his family didn't buy it. Margaret Kane buried her son on a gray Thursday in late March, her face carved from stone, her grief compressed into something harder than anger. At the wake, she stood beside Tommy's closed casket and told anyone who'd listen, "My son didn't drive drunk." Tommy's co-workers from the garage echoed her disbelief. "Tommy barely drank," said Ray Hutchins, who'd worked alongside him for 6 years. "Maybe a beer at a cookout, and he'd nurse it all afternoon." The idea of him pounding back 4 or 5 and getting behind the wheel, that ain't Tommy. But the real foundation of Margaret's certainty was Tommy's brother, David. David Kane had died in 1985, 8 years before Tommy. Killed when a drunk driver crossed the median on I-65 and hit his motorcycle head-on. Tommy had been 20 at the time, and the loss had carved something permanent into him. He'd attended Med-Deed meetings with his mother. He'd been the designated driver at every party throughout his 20s. He'd once ended a friendship over someone making jokes about drunk driving. Tommy watched his brother die because of alcohol. Margaret told Detective Hartley when she came to the station demanding answers. "You think he'd dishonor David's memory by doing the same thing? You think he'd put another family through what we went through?" Hartley listened patiently. He'd heard this before, families unable to accept that their loved ones were capable of fatal mistakes. Grief made people cling to impossibilities. The evidence was clear. Tommy Kane had been drunk. Tommy Kane had crashed. Case closed. Margaret left the station unsatisfied, clutching her purse, her son's memory defended but not vindicated. The whispers around Nashville were quieter but more pointed. Tommy's friends questioned why he'd been on Old Hickory Boulevard. It was nowhere near the route from Mario's to his garage apartment. Some noted that Denise's story felt rehearsed. too clean. But without evidence of wrongdoing, suspicion remained just that. Suspicion, floating like fog with nowhere to land. Time moved on the way it always does after tragedy. Slowly at first, then all at once. By summer, Denise Colson had sold her stake in the salon, where she'd worked for nearly a decade. She told clients she needed a fresh start, that Nashville held too many painful memories. By August, she'd moved to Atlanta. By November, she was dating a real estate agent named Paul Hendricks. In February 1995, less than 2 years after Tommy's death, Denise Colson became Denise Hendricks in a small ceremony at a chapel in Buckhead. The wedding photos showed her smiling, radiant, her past carefully cropped out of frame. She built a new life with alarming efficiency. New city, new husband, new name, new everything. But she kept one strange relic from the past. In 2003, 10 years after Tommy's death, Denise's younger sister found it while helping her move from Atlanta to Savannah. It was tucked inside a wooden jewelry box buried at the bottom of a bedroom closet, wrapped in tissue paper like something sacred or secret. A silver Zippo lighter, tarnished but still elegant, engraved on the side in Tommy's careful script. To D for every restart. T. Her sister held it up, confused. I didn't know you smoked. Denise took the lighter quickly, too quickly, and slipped it back into the box. I don't, she said. It's just sentimental. From who? Denise's jaw tightened. Someone from a long time ago. She never explained further. The lighter stayed packed away through 2 more moves, 3 more years of marriage, and eventually, a quiet divorce in 2008. Every time Denise had the chance to discard it, during purges, spring cleanings, fresh starts, she didn't. The lighter had been Tommy's first anniversary gift to her in 1990. He'd presented it during one of their makeups after a particularly brutal fight. His way of saying they could always start over, always reignite what they had. Denise had loved it then. She'd carried it everywhere, even though she only smoked occasionally, socially. Why keep it after everything? After the relationship collapsed, after Tommy died, after she'd moved on so completely? Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was genuine sentiment. Perhaps it was something darker. A trophy, a reminder, a kept secret whose meaning only she understood. The lighter remained, silent and silver, holding its story close. And Denise Colson Hendricks never spoke Tommy Kane's name again. Jack Rayner found Denise Colson, now Denise Hendricks Colson, after her second marriage, in February 2020, living in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Murfreesboro. She was 57, her dark hair now streaked with gray, her sharp edges softened by time and what appeared to be a quiet, unremarkable life. Her husband, Jeff Colson, ran a small contracting business. Neighbors described them as pleasant, private, normal. Rayner knocked on her door on a cold Tuesday afternoon. Denise answered wearing reading glasses and an expression that shifted from confusion to recognition to something harder within seconds. She knew why he was there before he said a word. I'm Jack Rayner, ma'am. Retired Metro Nashville Police. I'm working with the Cold Case Initiative, reviewing the death of Thomas Kane from 1993. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Her face remained composed, but Rayner noticed her hand tighten on the doorframe. That was 27 years ago. I already gave my statement. I know. But some details have come to light that weren't properly investigated at the time. Like what? Rayner didn't blink. Like the diazepam in Tommy's system, the prescription that matched yours. For a moment, something flickered behind her eyes. Panic, calculation, defiance. Then it disappeared. I don't know what you're talking about. Tommy was drunk. He crashed. That's what the police said. The police missed things. Denise's jaw set. I have nothing more to say. That part of my life is over. She closed the door. Rayner stood on the porch for a moment, knowing he'd rattled something loose. People who had nothing to hide didn't shut doors that quickly. He left his card wedged in the doorframe. 3 weeks passed. Rayner heard nothing. He continued building his case, compiling evidence, preparing a formal recommendation for reinvestigation. He assumed Denise would lawyer up, stay silent, let the past remain buried. Then his phone rang on March 12th, 2020. Mr. Rayner, this is Denise Coulson. I need to talk to you. Her voice sounded different. Smaller, strained, like something inside her had cracked. They met the next day at a coffee shop in Murfreesboro. Denise arrived alone, her hands shaking as she wrapped them around a cup of tea she never drank. She looked exhausted, hollowed out. What changed? Rayner asked quietly. Denise stared at the table. My husband found something. She explained. Jeff had been clearing out their attic the previous weekend, sorting through boxes they'd moved from Atlanta years ago. Most of it was junk, old clothes, forgotten Christmas decorations, photo albums. Then he found a small velvet jewelry box tucked inside a wooden chest. Inside was a silver Zippo lighter, engraved, "To D, for every restart, T." Jeff brought it downstairs that evening, curious. Who's T? He asked. Denise froze. She'd forgotten about the lighter, or convinced herself she had. It had survived 3 moves, 2 marriages, decades of purging and starting over. She'd kept it hidden so long it became invisible. Until it wasn't. An old boyfriend, she told Jeff, her voice tight. From before we met. Jeff examined the engraving, confused. For every restart? What does that mean? Nothing. It's old. But Jeff wasn't stupid. He saw the panic in her face, the way her hands trembled. That night, he Googled the name Thomas Kane along with Denise's maiden name. He found the obituary, the crash, the date, March 15th, 1993. You kept a lighter from a man who died drunk driving? Jeff asked, his voice careful but pointed. Why? Denise couldn't answer. The lies she'd built her life on started crumbling. Jeff didn't push, but the question hung in their house like smoke. Why keep it? Why hide it? What really happened? Now, sitting across from Rayner, Denise looked like a woman who'd been carrying a body for 27 years and finally couldn't hold the weight anymore. I need to clear my conscience, she whispered. Rayner pulled out his notebook. Then start at the beginning. What really happened on March 14th, 1993? Denise took a shaky breath, and the truth, after nearly 3 decades, finally began to surface. The coffee shop felt too bright, too ordinary for what was about to unfold. Jack Rayner kept his voice calm, his pen ready, watching Denise Coulson's face as she prepared to dismantle 27 years of lies. Tell me about the dinner, Rayner said gently. What really happened at Mario's? Denise's hands twisted around the untouched tea. Everything I told the police was true at first. We did have dinner. We did talk. But Tommy wasn't just emotional. He was desperate. He kept saying he'd made a mistake letting me go, that we could try again, that he'd changed. And how did you feel about that? Her jaw tightened. Annoyed, maybe angry. We'd been done for a year. I'd moved on. And here he was, dragging it all back up like I owed him something. Did he drink? 1 beer with dinner. That's it. She looked up at Rayner, her eyes harder now. I'm the one who kept ordering more. I'd slip away to the bar, come back with another bottle. He didn't even notice at first. He was too busy talking. Rayner's pen stopped. You were the one buying the drinks. Yes. And the diazepam? Denise's breath caught. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, I put it in his third beer. Just one pill? I crushed it up, stirred it in while he wasn't looking. Why? To calm him down. Her voice rose defensively. He was getting worked up, talking in circles, grabbing my hand across the table. I just wanted him to relax so we could have a normal conversation without it turning into another fight. Rayner leaned forward. Denise, mixing a benzodiazepine with alcohol is dangerous. You had to know that. I didn't think... She stopped herself. I just wanted him manageable. What happened after he took the pill? He started slowing down. His words got slurred. He looked tired. I told him he'd had too much, that I should drive him home. He didn't argue. Rayner's gut twisted. Did you drive him home? Denise's silence answered before her words did. No. 3 hours. That's how long it took for the full truth to emerge, pulled from Denise Colson in painful, fractured pieces. Rayner didn't rush. He circled back, pressed gently, let the inconsistencies pile up until she couldn't hold the story together anymore. Finally, she broke. I helped him to his truck, Denise said, her voice hollow. He could barely walk. I got him into the driver's seat and he just slumped there, passed out. The pill and the alcohol, it knocked him out completely. And then, her hands were shaking violently now. I drove. I had his keys. I drove his truck out of the parking lot with him unconscious beside me. Where did you go? Old Hickory Boulevard. I knew the curves out there. I'd driven them before. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. I parked the truck at the edge of the ravine, the one with the steep drop near the oak trees. Rayner felt cold. What did you do next? I shifted his body, positioned him behind the wheel. His head was already drooped forward, so She gestured vaguely. I made it look natural, like he was driving. Denise? Rayner's voice was sharp now. What did you do? Tears streamed down her face. I put his foot on the gas pedal. I put the truck in gear. And I let it go. The words hung in the air like poison. I thought it would just scare him, she said desperately. I thought he'd wake up when the truck started moving, that he'd hit the brakes, that he'd realize what almost happened. I wanted him to feel what I felt during all our fights. That fear, that loss of control, that moment when everything's spiraling and you can't stop it. Rayner's voice was ice, but he didn't wake up. No. Denise's face crumpled. The truck went over. I heard it crash through the trees, the metal hitting wood. I heard the engine still running. And then, silence. Did you check on him? I ran. Her voice broke. I ran back to my car. I'd followed him in my car, parked it down the road. I got in and I drove away. I didn't look back. So you left him there, unconscious, possibly dying. I didn't mean for it to go that far. Her cry echoed through the coffee shop. Other patrons looked over. Rayner didn't care. Why? He demanded. Why did you do this to him? Denise wiped her face with shaking hands. Because I wanted it to end. The guilt, the phone calls I knew would come, the second chances, the pathetic hope in his voice. I wanted him to stop existing in my life. And in that moment, standing there with him passed out, I realized I couldn't make that happen. She looked at Rayner with red, swollen eyes. He wasn't supposed to die. I just wanted it to end. The statement took 4 hours to complete. Denise wrote it by hand, her script getting sloppier as exhaustion and guilt bled through. Rayner watched her fill page after page, documenting every detail. The crushed pill, the staged crash, the deliberate positioning. And then, at the end, she added something that made Rayner's blood run cold. I went back the next morning. I heard about the jogger finding the truck on the news, and I drove out to Old Hickory Boulevard. I parked down the road and walked to where the police had set up tape. I could see his truck down in the ravine, the officers taking photos, the coroner's van arriving. I stood there at the edge of the road, watching them work. I found one of Tommy's cigarettes in my purse. He'd left the pack on the table at Mario's, and I'd taken them without thinking. I lit one and smoked it while I watched them zip him into a body bag. I needed to make sure he was gone. I needed to see it was real. And when they finally pulled his truck up with the winch and I saw the damage, I knew no one would question it. I finished the cigarette and drove home, and I never told anyone, not until now. Rayner read the passage twice, his stomach churning. She'd returned to the scene, watched them recover his body, smoked his cigarette like it was a victory lap. He looked at Denise across the table. This 57-year-old woman who'd carried a murder for 27 years and nearly gotten away with it. "You're going to be arrested," Rayner said quietly. "You understand that?" Denise nodded, her face blank with exhaustion. Why confess now, after all this time? She looked at the lighters sitting on the table between them. Tommy's lighter, the one that had survived everything. "Because I'm tired," she whispered. "And because he deserved better than being forgotten as a drunk driver." 2 days later, Denise Colson was charged with second-degree murder. And Thomas Kane's name was finally, truly, cleared. The state of Tennessee versus Denise Marie Colson went to trial in October 2020, nearly 28 years after Thomas Kane's truck plunged into that ravine. The courtroom in Nashville was packed. Reporters, true crime enthusiasts, Tommy's aging mother Margaret, who'd waited decades for this moment, and curious onlookers drawn to a case that had transformed from closed accident to cold-blooded murder. Denise sat at the defense table in a gray blouse and minimal makeup, her hands folded, her expression carefully neutral. Her attorney, a sharp criminal defense lawyer named Patricia Brennan, had constructed a narrative designed to inspire sympathy rather than outrage. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Marcus Webb, laid out the evidence methodically. The diazepam prescription, the staged crash scene, Denise's own written confession detailing how she'd drugged Tommy, driven him to the ravine, and sent his truck over the edge. Webb painted Denise as calculating, vengeful, a woman who'd planned and executed a murder, then walked free for nearly 3 decades. But Brennan countered with psychological warfare. She called expert witnesses who testified about Denise's documented history of anxiety and panic disorders in the early 90s. She presented evidence of Tommy and Denise's volatile relationship, the screaming matches neighbors had witnessed, the patterns of emotional manipulation both had engaged in. She framed Denise not as a murderer, but as a traumatized woman who'd snapped under pressure. "My client made a catastrophic mistake," Brennan told the jury during closing arguments. "She was emotionally unstable. Recently prescribed medication she didn't fully understand, and confronted by a man who'd spent 2 years putting her through psychological torment. She wanted to scare him, to make him feel the fear she'd felt. Did she act recklessly? Absolutely. Did she intend to kill Thomas Kane? The evidence simply doesn't support that." Brennan emphasized the confession itself as proof of Denise's remorse. A cold-blooded killer doesn't come forward after 27 years. A cold-blooded killer doesn't write a detailed confession. My client's conscience broke her. That tells you something about her character, about who she really is beneath this terrible mistake. The prosecution argued otherwise. Webb pointed to the return to the crash site, the smoking of Tommy's cigarette while watching his body be recovered. That's not remorse, Webb said sharply. That's a predator returning to admire her work. But the jury faced a difficult question. Could they prove intent to kill beyond reasonable doubt? Denise's confession was damning, but it was also ambiguous. She'd claimed she thought Tommy would wake up, that she'd only wanted to scare him. The diazepam and alcohol combination was dangerous, but not necessarily lethal by design. The staged crash could be interpreted as reckless endangerment rather than premeditated murder. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of voluntary manslaughter and tampering with evidence. Not murder. Not the premeditated killing the prosecution had pushed for. The judge sentenced Denise Colson to 10 years in prison, eligible for parole after 6. Margaret Kane wept in the gallery, not from satisfaction, but from exhaustion. Justice, after all this time, felt incomplete. 10 years for 28 years of lies. 10 years for her son's stolen life. Denise was led away in handcuffs, her face finally showing emotion, relief, perhaps, that it wasn't worse. But the story didn't end with the sentencing. 2 weeks after the trial concluded, Nashville journalists began digging deeper into Denise's background, searching for context, for patterns, for anything that might explain the woman who'd staged a lover's death and lived with it for decades. A reporter named Ashley Kern contacted Jeff Colson, Denise's now estranged second husband. Jeff had filed for divorce immediately after her arrest, his world shattered by revelations he'd never suspected. He agreed to an interview, his voice hollow with betrayal. Kern asked about the lighter, the catalyst that had finally cracked Denise's facade. She told me she kept it for closure, Jeff said, sitting in the empty house they'd once shared. That it reminded her of someone she'd lost, someone important from her past. I believed her. I thought it was, sentimental, romantic even. When did you realize there was more to it? Jeff's hands clenched. After the police took the box as evidence, they showed me what else was inside. Beneath the lighter, carefully folded and preserved in tissue paper, was a photograph of Tommy Kane. It had been taken outside his garage the week before he died. Tommy leaning against his pickup truck, smiling at whoever held the camera. Young, handsome, alive. And beneath the photograph, a small piece of paper. The handwriting was unmistakably Denise's, written in blue ink that had faded slightly over the decades. 3 words. One last ride. Jeff's voice cracked when he described it. She'd planned it. Maybe not from the beginning, but at some point she decided. And she kept that note. She kept his picture. Like trophies. The revelation exploded across media coverage. Defense claims of spontaneous emotional breakdown crumbled under the weight of that note. One last ride, written before Tommy died, kept for 27 years. Denise Colson hadn't snapped in a moment of trauma. She'd set a trap. Tommy had thought he was going to a reunion dinner, a chance to talk, to find closure, maybe even to rekindle something they'd once had. Denise called it closure too. But her version of closure ended at the bottom of a ravine. Margaret Kane died in 2022, 2 years after Denise's conviction. She'd lived just long enough to see her son's name cleared, to know the truth had finally surfaced. Tommy's grave was updated with a new marker, paid for by donations from Nashville residents who'd followed the case. Thomas Tommy Kane, beloved son and brother. Justice delayed, but not denied. Denise Colson remains incarcerated at the Tennessee Prison for Women, eligible for parole in 2026. She's given no interviews. The lighter, the photograph, and the note are stored in evidence archives. Silent witnesses to a murder dressed as an accident for nearly 3 decades. Jack Rayner, now 70, keeps a copy of the case file in his home office. Sometimes he thinks about all the cases that never get reopened, all the truths that stay buried, because no one bothers to look twice. And sometimes, late at night, he thinks about Tommy Kane, 28 years old, trusting enough to meet an ex-girlfriend for dinner, never knowing it would be his last meal. He thought it was a reunion. She called it closure. Hit subscribe if you believe everyone should be treated fairly. Only haters, manipulators, and trolls won't subscribe. If you believe people should be treated fairly, hit subscribe. Trolls won't. Comment "I stand for justice" if you're not siding with the bully.